Welcome to step 3, which is eliminate. We want you to eliminate the triggers that are causing your pain and that are creating a lower mechanical capacity. What we also want you to understand is that these triggers are the things that are creating an unstable spine. And if you have an unstable spine, you're going to get pain eventually. There are 3 main triggers that we want you to really concentrate and try to eliminate. And there are the poor A, B, and C's. Poor alignment, poor breathing, and poor coordination. All 3 of these are interdependent upon each other. Just like a 3-legged stool needs all 3 legs for the stool to be stable, your spine needs all 3 of these things: alignment, breathing, and coordination, in order for it to be stable. We want to show you an example of how each of these, the poor ABCs, how each one of them affects having an unstable spine. In order for you to have the best or ideal alignment, what we want is a straight line going from your ear, your shoulder, your hip, your knee, and through your ankle. And that straight line is going to give you the most amount of stability. Now, if you deviate from that line just a little bit, you're not only going to be more unstable, but you're going to be in more risk for pain and injury. And a simple example that Stu McGill does is a chin poke. What we want you to do is stand in a straight line, put your hands in your back, and feel the muscles along your spine. If you're in the proper alignment, you're not going to feel the muscles turning on and feeling really hard and compressing and shearing those back vertebrae and discs. So what we want you to do is go ahead and poke the chin forward just a little bit, and you can feel that those muscles turn on immediately. For every inch that your head goes forward, you're going to put 10 more pounds on your whole back and your whole system. And that slowly starts to increase and creates more problems and more irritation and more overloading of those joint segments. And that's a quick example of how poor alignment relates to stability. The next trigger that we want to try to eliminate is poor breathing. It's impossible for you to have proper or ideal breathing unless your alignment is right. And you need to have the proper alignment of your rib cage over your pelvis in order for you to have the right amount of stability. Imagine that your pelvis and your rib cage, they create a whole cylinder, and that cylinder wraps around your whole core area and your back, and it creates a stable spine. And if your rib cage is flared out, or if your rib cage is ducking down in, you're not going to be able to have a strong cylinder. And you can see if I put a little kink in it and the rib cage or the top is not in line with the bottom, it's going to buckle really easily, or it's going to compress, or it's going to be able to shear, and you can see how it crushes very easily. If the top and the bottom are lined up properly, it's going to take a lot of strength and a lot of compression in order for you to distort or to buckle that system. And the same is true with your body. Now, the next thing that you have to understand is that if you're breathing properly, you're going to be using what we call your diaphragm. And what your diaphragm does, you can see in this example, is it draws air into the lungs. And as the diaphragm draws air into the lungs, it actually compresses your guts and your intestines and all your innards, and it increases the pressure of that cylinder or your abdominal region. As the pressure increases, the value of that is that your spine in that whole area becomes more buttressed and more stiff and more able to resist load. If you don't have that pressurization, almost like if you had an empty can, it'd be easy to go ahead and buckle. It's almost impossible for you to crush a can from the top down if it's pressurized, and it's very hard to do that. And that's one of the reasons why cans have this pressurization, because as they stack the cans, it can resist more load. The last thing that we want you to eliminate is poor coordination. And poor coordination relates to alignment and breathing, because if you don't have the right alignment, you can't have the right breathing mechanics. If you can't have the right breathing mechanics, you're not going to have the right pressurization. If you don't have the right pressurization, you're going to be moving at certain segments, most likely the segment that is irritated or that's painful on your back, and you'll be moving from that segment versus stabilizing that segment and moving from other places, say like your hips, or using other areas that really are meant to move. Your spine is not meant to move too much. And you can see from this credit card that if I'm moving back and forth, kind of like our spine, we only have a certain amount of capacity in that spine to move. And if I keep on going, especially to the end ranges of motion, I'm ultimately going to wear and tear that thing down, and ultimately it's going to buckle and it's going to tear, or it's going to create some sort of problem. So now that you have kind of an idea of the different reasons why we want to try to eliminate the pore A, B, and C, let's go ahead and look at some examples of how you actually fix this. So let's take a look at some of those. The first step in eliminating pore A, B's, and C's is teaching you to find neutral pelvis. We do this in the quadruped position. Neutral pelvis is when your hip joint, your shoulder joint, and your ear are all in alignment and you have a soft curve in your low back. The next position we want you to go into is anterior tilt. That's when your pelvic bowl drops forward and you get more of an arch in your low back. Then we want you to tuck the tail underneath you and go into a posterior tilt. Learn how to go between the anterior tilt and the posterior tilt to find what's in the middle, which would be neutral pelvis. Avoid letting the shoulder blades come together and the head dropping and the back sagging. Also, try to avoid pushing too far from the mid-back and letting the head drop. Avoid moving from the neck and flopping around like a dead worm. Just try to move from your pelvic region. Anterior and posterior tilt, and then find neutral. Once you've mastered this, go to the seated position. You can notice that the hip, the shoulder, and the ear are all in alignment with a soft curve in my back. Rock your pelvis forward so you're sitting on your sits bones. You'll get a bigger arch in your back, and that's the anterior tilt. Tuck your tail underneath you so you're sitting on your tailbone, and that's the posterior tilt. Then come back up into neutral spine. The last position we want you to find neutral pelvis is in standing. Notice how there's a straight line from my hip, my shoulder, and my ear with a soft curve in my back. From here, dip your pelvic bowl forward and you'll go into an anterior tilt. Notice the curve in my spine. Transition this to a posterior tilt. Tuck the tail underneath you and notice how flat my spine is. Keep your spine as long and still as possible and don't move at your head or shoulder. Now that you know how to find neutral pelvis in all three positions, we want to teach you the proper alignment and breathing in three static positions: 3-month supine, seated, and standing position. Let's teach you how to do alignment in a 3-month supine position. First, have your hips and knees at 90 degrees, with your knees slightly rotated out. Next, find neutral pelvis. Go into an anterior tilt and then a posterior tilt, and you'll find right in the middle, which would be neutral spine. The lower back should be gently adhering to the table. Next, you want to have your head and cervical spine in neutral. Do not tuck the chin in too far where you lose the curve in your cervical spine and you tuck your chin in too far. Next, be aware of tilting your chin too far back and keeping your neck in extension. You might need to put a towel underneath your neck in order for you to have your head and cervical spine in neutral. This is what it should look like. The next thing we want are neutral shoulders. Notice how we don't want the shoulders to have improper alignment of rolling forward too far or pinching back too far and popping up the rib cage. Instead, we really want to find the in-between. The shoulders are also not shrugged. Lastly, we want you to have a neutral chest and rib cage. We don't want the chest puffing out and the rib cage popping out, nor do we want your chest caving in and your rib cage pushing into your belly. From this improper alignment, you could go to the opposite improper alignment and find the middle ground, which would be a neutral chest and rib cage, shown here. To correct your poor alignment and eliminate your trigger, we want to give you an alignment checklist, which includes having your hips at 90 degrees, your pelvis in neutral, your head and cervical spine in neutral, your shoulders in neutral, your chest and rib cage in neutral, and when you're in this position, you just go through that checklist and that will eliminate your pore alignment. Now that you know the proper alignment for the supine 90-90 or supine 3-month-old, we want to go over the proper way to breathe. When you're breathing properly, you're increasing the inner abdominal pressure. This pressure increase activates your core stabilizers and functions to brace and stabilize the spine, similar to using a weight belt. It also could be similar to a cylinder. And just like the cylinder has a top and a bottom and a front and a back side to the cylinder, so does your core or abdominal region. And so when you're breathing properly, you're activating all 4 parts. We want to educate you on using all 4 parts when you're breathing. If you can't activate one or all of these muscles, your abdominal region will lose pressurization, you'll lose alignment, and you'll not be able to tolerate load, and you'll end up buckling your spine like what we've shown before. Now we'll show you part 1 of breathing, which is the top of the cylinder, which is also known as the diaphragm. Remember that as the diaphragm drops down, it draws air into the lungs and pushes against the guts. This is why your stomach seems to pouch out a little bit if you're using your diaphragm properly. Notice how the whole abdominal cavity is expanding, and I'm not just pushing my stomach out in the frontward direction. Instead, it should look like this. Let's show you how to use your diaphragm in the 3-month supine position. When you inhale, your belly button should not get closer to your spine, and your chest should not rise up, and your rib cage should not flare. To help you gain awareness of breathing properly, put one hand on your chest and one hand on your stomach. As you inhale, the hand on your stomach should rise and the hand on your chest should stay quiet. Again, what we're looking to eliminate is breathing from the chest, using accessory breathing muscles, and not using your diaphragm properly. Once you've mastered this, go to the seated position. In the seated position, remember, we always start with alignment. So we start with a neutral pelvis. The head and the cervical spine are in neutral, so the jawline should basically be horizontal to the ground. Your ear is in line with your shoulders. Your shoulders aren't rolled forward. Your chest shouldn't be caved or puffed out, and your rib cage shouldn't be flared or dipping into your guts. Now that you have the proper alignment, let's work on eliminating the poor breathing patterns. Eliminate when you inhale, your belly button comes closer to your spine and your ribs flare out. Instead, use your diaphragm and your belly button should come out as you're taking a breath in. Notice how the whole cylinder is expanding as you inhale. If you're having a hard time using your diaphragm, we suggest putting one hand on your chest and one hand on your stomach. Inhale and make sure that the hand on the belly moves, the hand on the chest stays still. When you've mastered the seated position, work on the standing position. And remember, we always first start with the alignment. There should be a straight line going from your ear to your shoulder, through your hip, through your knee joint, and down to your ankle bone. Now you can start working on breathing from the diaphragm. Do not let the chest expand or the belly button suck in while you're inhaling. Rather, the hand on the chest should stay quiet and the belly button should expand out. Avoid letting your stomach pooch out or get a huge Buddha belly. Part 2, which is made up of the rib cage, and Part 3, which is made up of the flanks and the back, are all part of the cylinder or that whole core region, and each part complements the other part. As you're inspiring, most people don't know that the rib cage really needs to expand and contract anywhere from 2 to 4 inches. If you don't have this proper expansion and contraction, either you're going to stay in a inspired with a big barrel chest, or you'll be in a contracted state of the rib cage, and both are not desirable and you need to eliminate them. So in this section we're going to teach you how to unflare your rib cage or get a unbarreled chest, and we also want to teach you how to breathe from your flanks and low back. You can see my hands are on my flanks, and we want you to breathe. As you're breathing, you really shouldn't be able to see a person's rib cage flare up and out as they inspire. As you're inhaling, you should be getting 360 degrees expansion of the lower rib cage. Now let's show you how to eliminate poor breathing through your rib cage, your flanks, and your low back in the 3-month position. Remember that we always start with alignment first, and so you'll go through the same alignment checklist that you would for the other supine exercises. Now that you're in the proper alignment, we can work on the proper breathing. The goal of this is to really flush that rib cage down so it's not flared up, and you are getting full 360 degrees movement through the lower rib cage. We want to try to eliminate popping the rib cage up and keeping it up as you're breathing in and out. If you're having a hard time unflaring the rib cage, we suggest putting your hand on your rib cage and breathing out or making a C or a H sound, a hot breath they call it in yoga, and really flushing the rib cage down. Here are 2 pictures of a poor rib cage while breathing, and here's another picture of a proper rib cage while breathing. So throughout the whole inspiration and expiration, try not to let the rib cage flare out. Your rib cage would be considered the front of your cylinder, while the flanks would be the side of your cylinder, and the back would be the back of your cylinder. To eliminate poor breathing, wrap your fingers all the way around just below your rib cage and stick your thumbs into your back. Gently push out against the webbing of your hands and into your thumbs, almost like you're going to cough or hurl. Your stomach shouldn't pop out when you give this counter pressure. Maintain this inner abdominal pressure as you inhale and exhale. Do not let your abdominal region go soft. You may have noticed that when you do this exercise, your rib cage also comes down and does not flare. After you've mastered this, go to the seated position. Remember, do your alignment checklist, then begin your breathing. We want to eliminate this type of breathing, which decreases the pressurization in your abdominal region, to more of this type of breathing, where you have pressurization all around from the front, the sides, and the back of your abdominal region. Place your hands on your rib cage and see if you can keep it flat while breathing. Then try the flanks. Lastly, your back. I try to imagine like I have gills in my low rib cage and I'm breathing through them. Notice how these 3 areas work together to really brace the spine. When you can do this properly, go to the standing position. Remember, you want to check your alignment first, and then you could do your breathing drill. Eliminate this type of breathing. This is like an unpressurized cylinder that can be crushed very easily. Instead, move towards this position of flattening out the rib cage, pressurizing the whole abdominal region, and tightening up the flanks and back. Note that you can't see my rib cage flaring out. If you're having trouble, put the hands on the rib cage and breathe out and flatten the rib cage down. If you're having a hard time maintaining inner abdominal pressure, push against your webbing of your hand, or stick your thumbs in your back and press out using your inner abdominal pressure. The goal is for you to gently brace all sides of your cylinder as you're inhaling and as you're exhaling. Now you're going to learn how to use the bottom of your cylinder, which we call your pelvic floor, and we'll do this in the 3-month supine position. Go through your alignment checklist, then we'll work on your breathing. Find your hip bones and place your fingers about an inch in from them. Increase your abdominal pressure almost like you're going to take a pee, and gently press out against your fingers. Eliminate depressurizing your lower abdominal or pelvic floor region. Initiate and maintain inner abdominal pressure through the whole respiratory cycle in the lower ab or pelvic floor area. This muscle activation is similar to when you're trying to squeeze out the last drop of pee. Now in the seated position, go through your checklist for your alignment, then we'll work on the breathing. Eliminate depressurization of your abdominal region. Apply counter pressure to your fingers throughout the whole respiratory cycle. Notice how there's expansion of the lower pelvic region. After you've learned how to do this, go to the standing position. Go through your standing alignment and then practice your breathing. Eliminate not having any pressure against your fingers. Instead, push out against your fingers and maintain this counter pressure through the respiratory cycles. Now that you've been on this long journey, let's show you how we're going to be putting it all together. Remember that your cylinder has a top, a bottom, and sides to it that create a stable cylinder. We'll begin in the 3-month supine position. First start with your alignment, then we go to the breathing. We'll add one part on the next part. So first start with your diaphragm, then you flush the rib cage down while you're continually breathing from the diaphragm. Then add your flanks and back while keeping the rib cage down and breathing from the diaphragm. Maintain counter pressure against the web of your hand and your thumb. And lastly, add in the pelvic floor. Counter pressure against the fingers, breathing into your lower abdominals, keeping the flanks and back tight, rib cage down, and then breathing from your diaphragm. Next, go into the seated position where you're going to check your alignment and then your breathing, and then we'll go through all 4 parts again. Begin with breathing from the diaphragm, then move to the rib cage. Continue to breathe with the diaphragm with the rib cage locked. Then add in the flanks and the back while breathing from the diaphragm with the rib cage locked down. Lastly, add in the pelvic floor, counter pressure against the thumbs, inner abdominal pressure, and breathe with all 4 parts engaged. Your final drill will be in standing. Go through your alignment checklist for standing, and then we'll begin our breathing. We'll first start with breathing from the diaphragm. After you have begun breathing with the diaphragm, then you can add in breathing and locking down the rib cage, keeping that tight, and then go to the flanks, keeping the rib cage, diaphragm, and flanks tight, and then you'd also counter pressure with the back. Then you would add in the pelvic floor and try to do all of them at the same time. Remember that the breathing and the alignment are related. We want the chest and the rib cage aligned over the pelvis so that you're like a strong cylinder, and the more aligned you are, the better breathing you'll have, and the better breathing you have, the more your muscles will be stabilizing and buttressing the spine. The more that they are stabilizing the spine, the more support and the less prone you are to injury, torque, shear, and compression, all things that irritate your back. So continue to work on all 4 parts of the abs when you're breathing, and you will continue to tune up your back and make it stronger every day. The last thing we want you to eliminate is poor coordination. Poor coordination can also be called poor movement patterns, which means not moving at the right time, at the right place, with the right alignment and the right breathing. Poor coordination puts wear and tear on your body over time, and you remember your body only has a certain capacity, just like this credit card, to do certain movement patterns until finally it gives up and fails, which can lead to a tear and a bulge in your disc, or irritating your spinal nerves, or irritating your joints of your vertebrae, or other problems. To eliminate poor coordination, there are 2 principles you must understand. 1, the hip hinge, and 2, move at the limbs, not at the spine. Principle 1, move at the hips, not at the spine. There's a dowel behind my back so you can clearly see where I'm moving and where I'm not moving. Eliminate letting the dowel come off your butt, because that means that you're moving from your spine. Notice in this position, the alignment and breathing are off also. Set yourself up in the proper alignment, brace all 4 parts of your abs, and then push the hips back, keeping the spine nice and long. Improve your coordination by doing short stop squats. Keep your arms straight and slowly slide your hands down your thighs. When you're down there, go ahead and take a couple deep breaths, keeping your abs and core tight, and then go ahead and slide back up. Push through the floor and activate your glutes, your hips, as you're pressing your body up. Knees should also be over 2nd and 3rd toe. Eliminate from bending from the back and not the hips. Maintain a neutral spine like this. Eliminate also hinging from the spine instead of hinging from the hips like this. Notice how my spine in this picture moves, but my hips don't. This is what it should look like. Apply the short stop squat to getting in and out of a chair. Notice how the spine and the hips are working the way they should. And then this squat, I'm bending from my back and not using my hips. Once you're more advanced with your short stop squat, you can start picking up stuff off the floor without using poor form, which will contribute to overall wear and tear. You also have to be aware of how you put things down. Once you could do this pain-free, you could go to heavier loads like the laundry basket. Now let's focus on principle 2, move at your limbs, not at your spine. Notice how the spine is not moving and the limb is doing all the motion. Here are some more activities of daily living that you can work on your coordination, such as vacuuming. Remember to move from your limbs and not your back. But in this, my lower limbs aren't moving and my spine is doing all the work. Get in proper alignment, brace the abs, and move from the limbs, not the spine. Keep the resistance near the body. Now let's apply this to something like entering and exiting a car. Alignment and breathing are on par. Then I'm moving at the hip joint and not moving at the spine. The spine stays still. I scoot back so my tailbone's all the way in the back of the seat of the car, and when I exit, I shift forward, move at the hips, shift forward, use the short stop squat, and come up. Picking something up off the floor, maintain proper alignment and breathing, move from your limbs, hip hinge, keep the weight close to your body, move at the limb, and keep the spine straight. This is the proper way of getting out of bed or off the floor from the supine position. Begin with moving, we call this log rolling, keeping the spine from torquing and bending, bringing the leg up, moving at the limb, not the spine, pushing up as one unit, moving at the limb, and keeping the spine neutral. And the same when you're going down, it's just the opposite. Now that you know how to eliminate the poor A, B's, and C's, practice, 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 and move on to step 4. Please note that many of these strategies for eliminating the poor A, B's, and C's were adapted from Stu McGill's book, The Back Mechanic.